Some of you may know this, probably many do not, but we tried to advance the first Diablo Range bill earlier this year. In early April, we had put together a draft bill, a Diablo Range bill, that would officially recognize the Diablo Range as a California conservation priority. It would also establish a conservation program within California's Wildlife Conservation Board to funnel more funds and resources to the protection of the Diablo Range. We went before our first Assembly Committee in early April, the Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife. We made our case, why we felt the Assembly, and this committee in particular, should recognize the Diablo Range as a California conservation priority and establish a Diablo Range conservation program within the WCB, the Wildlife Conservation Board. We were successful. It was a vote of 10 in favor, 2 against, and 1 abstention. So we were thrilled. That was our first victory. And then we next went in late April to the Assembly Committee on Natural Resources. And we did the same thing again. We provided testimony why the Diablo Range should be a California conservation priority, why a Diablo Range conservation program should be established at the Wildlife Conservation Board. And we were victorious. We were thrilled. We had 12 votes in favor, 1 vote against, and 1 abstention. Next, in late May, was the Appropriations Committee. And this is when things got different. California, as many of you know, is facing a pretty large deficit with the budget. So what happened at the Appropriations Committee is all bills that would establish new programs that had costs associated with it were stopped. They were put in suspension. So unfortunately, despite all that great momentum for our Diablo Range bill, it stopped at the Appropriations Committee, as did all the other bills establishing new programs. So we were disappointed about that, but we also recognized we had done an incredible job generating awareness for the Diablo Range. Many of these elected officials had never heard of the Diablo Range until they got our bill and heard our testimony. And we were not gonna, be knocked down by this. So we actually quickly pivoted to create a Diablo Range Assembly Concurrent Resolution, a document that would officially recognize the Diablo Range as a California conservation priority, not establish a new program with cost, but just have the Assembly and the Senate bless that the Diablo Range is truly a California conservation priority. And this week, with the help of Assembly Member Rebecca Bauer-Kahan, we introduced that. So it is now being considered right now, and we're hoping by August we will have been successful and that the Diablo Range will receive that official blessing as a California conservation priority, which will make it easier next year to revisit this bill idea where we would also establish a program to send funds to the Diablo Range. June 5th, that was a big date for us as well recently. And again, these things are made possible because of you. I mean, literally, the people in this room, what you enable us to do is incredible. On June 5th, we held the first ever Diablo Range convening. In San Juan Bautista, we had over 150 people register for the event, representing over 60 organizations, land trusts, advocacy groups, state agencies. The first time all these people had ever gathered to talk about the Diablo Range and how do we work together to protect this incredible 200-mile-long mountain range that runs through 12 counties, has species like the California condor and tule elk and golden eagles and blunt-nosed leopard lizards, on and on. Because we've realized there's just been a vacuum on people getting coordinated and working together for the Diablo Range. So it was so uplifting to see so many people show up for our first ever Diablo Range convening. We'll make this an annual event going forward. And the enthusiasm in the room was palpable.
Where were the people from?
From all over, but mostly throughout the Diablo Range. But we had a lot of government officials come down from Sacramento. So it was a very diverse group. We had tribal representation, land trusts, state agencies, advocacy groups, all kinds of people. So it was a really outstanding first ever convention.
BLM too.
BLM was there, and of course, that was a big topic of discussion. There were also national park people there, and of course, BLM is the largest landowner in the Diablo Range, and they've been under attack, and the National Park Service has been under attack. And you just understand how important it is to bring more partners together to help each other during these times. That's what it's going to take. So we were so glad to be the catalyst for that. And of course, you're making that possible. So thank you. Public lands related to this discussion we just had. Late June, we started to hear the rumblings that Senator Mike Lee in Utah was trying to sell off our public lands. And as we looked into the matter more and more, we realized he was targeting over 3 million acres of lands in his first go. And it included over 200,000 acres in the Diablo Range owned by the Bureau of Land Management. So our team, literally within a few days, created a whole campaign to fight against that. And our team, I'm so proud how our team did this in just such a short period of time. We sent out this Action Network e-blast, and our supporters sent about 17,000 letters to people in Congress saying, do not sell off our public lands in the Diablo Range or in California or anywhere in our country. So we were very much part of the resistance against Senator Mike Lee's effort. And ultimately, he had to let go of his proposal to try to sell off our public lands. And it was really heartening to also see it was a bipartisan effort to stop that madness. Republicans, Democrats, independents together all came together to fight this proposal. And we'll remain vigilant. Again, there's a lot of BLM land in the Diablo Range. So people like Senator Mike Lee will probably continue to poke around and see if they can take advantage of this. But just thought it was so great that our community was so vocal and took such a lead role in pushing against Senator Mike Lee and his proposal. CEQA. We took on a giant in the city of Dublin in late June, June 26. We had a CEQA trial against the city of Dublin. Some of you may recall, last year, we tried to fight the city of Dublin in their Measure II. They were using Measure II to play a game and open up some land for development, is what it really came down to. And they tried to disguise it in really awful ways, as if it was an effort to protect open space and just other absurd things. So we fought them on that, but their deception was too deceiving to the voting public. So we had launched this CEQA lawsuit against the city of Dublin. The trial was on June 26, as I said. We should be getting a decision soon. We don't know which way it's going to go, but the judge said a couple of important things at the end of the trial that gave us hope. First of all, he recognized that the case relied on by our attorneys was the controlling case. So that was a very good sign. Secondly, he also recognized that our side should go ahead and create a draft writ that would essentially extinguish Measure II. So why would he ask us to do that, our attorneys, if he wasn't leaning in our direction? Who knows? Time will tell what happens. But if we win that case, that is a big victory, big David versus Goliath victory. So stay tuned for details on that. Land acquisition, as always, we're working on new land acquisition opportunities. Right now, we're working to protect North Peak Ranch on the slopes of Mount Diablo. That continues to be a central focus area. Some of you may recall that missing mile on Mount Diablo. It's where we protected Crane Pond. That's where we protected the Conquer Mount Diablo Trail Ride Association land. Whenever we can protect land on the mountain, it is a major priority for us. We have 2 more payments to make, one at the end of this year of about $100,000, and then next year a little over $250,000. And with that final payment, will then take ownership of North Peak Ranch, which is about 80 acres inside, contiguous with Mount Diablo State Park, very important. The Balzerzak property. You may recall a couple of years ago, we acquired the Balzerzak in-holding within Mount Diablo State Park. We have paid off half of that. The next half we have to pay off by August. So we're working on that right now. McGee Preserve Trails, we're working to acquire 2 trail easements right now to open up public trails at the McGee Preserve in Danville. Those negotiations are literally going on right now, and we hope to finish that up certainly by this fall, if not this summer. Altamont Pass mapping. Malcolm has actually worked very hard on this with our staff. When you look at the Diablo Range map, the most narrow section is Altamont Pass. Just about 7 miles in width, and you recognize if that is poorly developed, poorly used, the head, where Mount Diablo is, gets severed from the rest of the body. And that incredible wildlife habitat corridor will be forever harmed. So we're working right now to map critical lands there in the Altamont Pass area on both sides of 580. So we understand where the opportunities are and we can start to prioritize acquisition opportunities. That's going to be a critical focus of our acquisition efforts going forward. One other thing I wanted to mention is another bill, SB 630. This is a bill that will make it easier for state parks to acquire land. And Save Mount Diablo formed a coalition of conservation organizations to collectively and gently push state parks to get good with acquisition again. We're in partnership with Save the Redwoods League, Sonoma Land Trust, California Parks Foundation, Post, Peninsula Open Space Trust, and others. And we've been advocating for the process for state parks to acquire lands to be simplified, to be expedited. So SB 630 was heard this week by the Assembly Committee on Water, Parks, and Wildlife, and they approved it. So that was a big step forward, and it was a big vote like we got with our other bill. It was 10 in favor and 3 against, went along party lines. So hopefully by the end of this legislative cycle, SB 630 will become law and the process for state parks to acquire many new lands will have been simplified. And I'm also happy to mention just our mid-year appeal. You know, this mid-year point is always important. We do a mid-year appeal to make sure we've got good funds for the second half of the year to support our operations. We had set a goal this year of $188,000, more than our budgeted goal last year. And as of today, we're at $187,450. So we have to do this by the end of July. So, so that's enough sort of insider stuff. Any questions before I introduce Joseph Belli? All right. Joseph Belli, conservation biologist, one of the state's leading experts on the Diablo Range, an author, and Joseph has actually brought a couple of his books tonight, which you can purchase at the end of his presentation, and he will sign them as well, right, Joseph? Which is very nice. Yeah, Joseph, thanks to Seth, we established this relationship with Joseph, and he has just given us such great counsel and advice on our Diablo Range expansion and how to do it. Tonight's presentation is going to be very much about some of the unique species you can find in the Diablo Range and how important the concept of connectivity is. You know, for example, up in the Mount Diablo area, we love the golden eagles we see. Well, we see so many golden eagles here because Mount Diablo is not an island. It's connected to the larger Diablo Range. So Joseph will help us better understand connectivity and, again, some of the unique species in the Diablo Range. He will speak for about 40 minutes, and then he'll take questions at the end. So not during his presentation, but at the end of his presentation. And we have roughly 20 minutes for Q&A. Sound good? Yeah. All right, let's give it up for Joseph Belli.
Thank you, Ted. Glad to be here. Well, tonight I'm going to talk about the Diablo Range and some of the creatures there. This slide I think you're all pretty familiar with. Some of the stats about how extensive it is, 200 miles long, 3.7 million acres. A couple of things I wanted to talk about here on this slide is the range shadow effect. The Diablo Range is a fairly dry range. And as you go east to, if you go from the west toward the east, you get less precipitation as you go. So there's a rain shadow effect going on. And there's a slight rain shadow effect from the north to south as well, although that's less dramatic. What that means is there's a variety of habitats. And there's some of the main habitats that I'm going to talk about just a little bit.
Can you speak up a little bit more, Joseph?
Sure. Oak woodlands. There are a couple different types of oak woodlands that are prominent in the Diablo Range. Right over here, you've got a blue oak woodland, which is more open and drier. Blue oaks are really drought tolerant. Back around here, you've got a coast live oak woodland, and those are really moist. Those primarily only occur in the northwest section of the range. The grasslands by this time are now dominated by non-natives. Chaparral is one of the more common habitats in the range. One of my favorites, Valley Oak Savanna. San Joaquin Desert. That occurs in the southeast portion of the range. Basically, it's North America's smallest desert, and it occurs in the southwest corner of the San Joaquin Valley and into the foothills of the Diablo Range. It has a bunch of critters that basically have counterparts in the Mojave Desert, to the point where you could almost see it as an extension of the Mojave. But it's a very important part of the Diablo Range. As far as aquatic habitats go, there are thousands of ponds and bodies of water in the Diablo Range, from tiny stock ponds to San Luis Reservoir. The thing that most people don't know is that almost all of them were built by people. So natural water, standing water in the Diablo Range, there's almost no natural lakes. That can be a good thing in a lot of ways. It can enhance some habitat, but it can also be kind of a bad thing if it provides habitat for invasive species. As far as the riparian habitats, which are streams, most of them dry back in summer, but the perennial streams tend to be associated with fault lines, and there are much fewer perennial streams than non-perennial. All that means that there's an awful lot of diversity of native species in the Diablo Range. According to my count, 61 native mammals, 34 reptiles, 13 amphibians, at least a dozen fish. I'm not too strong on fish. Over 400 species of birds. Tonight I'm going to focus on the first three: mammals, reptiles, and amphibians. And we're going to kind of get into the weeds a little bit, so I hope you don't mind, especially with the herpetology stuff. It's just kind of a breakdown of some of the types of mammals. 18 kinds of bats. I think that's pretty cool. There's probably no less about bats than, well, in general, I think there's not a great deal of studies been done, but it would be kind of cool to get more information on that. Here's a picture of a gray fox on the left. I wanted to talk about western gray squirrels here. They're the Diablo Range's only native tree squirrel, and they're only found in the northern part of the range. They seem to be declining. I don't know if any of you here knows, but I believe they used to exist around Mount Diablo, but I don't believe they're found there anymore. Does anybody have any? No?
If you read Grinnell and some of the other early mammalogists, they were never found on the mountain.
Oh, okay.
The closest was south of the mountain, south of Livermore.
Ah, okay. So they never were. Maybe they were never quite that far north.
That far north. They certainly hadn't been found in that period when people like Joseph Dixon and Grinnell were out collecting.
Yeah. Okay. So yeah, they seem to be declining, and they're only found in the northern part of the range and mostly on the west side. They're kind of a favorite of mine, kind of like the underdog. Bobcats are pretty common throughout the range, as are coyotes, these mid-level carnivores here. Badgers. This is a California species, a state species of special concern. They're found in a lot of different habitats, but they primarily in the Diablo Range, they're in grassland and arid areas. They're less common in the north. I'm sure you probably agree with that, those of you who live up here. They tend to be more common in the southern part of the range. They're highly adapted for digging, and habitat loss is one of their threats, as is roadkill. So this is a species that I think gets kind of overlooked when we talk about corridor species, but this is an animal that needs a fairly wide home range, despite the fact that they're small animals. I tend to see them hit by cars on Pacheco Pass and in San Benito County quite a bit. So I have a few worries about that, and I'd like to see more protection from them down the road.
Let me ask you. Oh,
Yeah.
we're not gonna ask questions.
Don't forget it. San Joaquin kit fox. This was one of the original endangered species in 1967. Actually, it's a subspecies. They're endemic to Central California, but they're truly desert adapted species. They do best in the driest areas. They have some limitations as far as habitat goes. They don't like slopes. They don't like going up and down mountains. So most of the Diablo Range is not habitat for this species. They're also limited by vegetation. They like open areas with low grass. They do not at all like forests or chaparral. They tend to rely on burrows for shelter because they have a lot of enemies, or many predators. There are three core populations for this species. One is actually the city of Bakersfield. The other is some of the natural lands west of Bakersfield, including the Carrizo Plain. So those are the two main core populations. The third core population is in the Pinoche area, Pinoche Valley and surrounding area. So that's basically the only core area close to Northern California. What happened is they used to occur in the Salinas Valley and in the East Bay as well. Those populations were extirpated sometime around 2000 and slightly after that. And I don't know if anybody knows exactly why, because by that time they were already protected under the ESA. But they disappeared from this area nonetheless. Part of the reason that I think that, I think the East Bay is kind of marginal habitat for them. I think their prey base up here, instead of being kangaroo rats, which it is down south, their prey base up north, with so many fewer kangaroo rats, tends to be ground squirrels. And there just so happened to be a big ground squirrel eradication program going on in the 1980s. So I kind of wonder if the effectiveness of that program might have had an effect on the population of the San Joaquin kit fox in the East Bay. That's just my theory, but at any rate, to go forward into the future, this is a prime corridor species, a species that needs a lot of room to roam. To give you an idea or an example of that, when young kit foxes like this one that we saw dead in Pinoche Valley, when young kit foxes start to disperse from their natal dens, they sometimes go as far as 40 miles. And my feeling is that if we are ever going to get kit foxes back in the East Bay, and I don't know if that's going to be a priority or if it's even possible, we're going to definitely need to have a wildlands corridor north of Pacheco Pass, because right now that's about as far north as they're found. And the Pinoche population is where these animals will disperse from. So it's been a real big issue for me. Another animal, this is kind of maybe the most mysterious mammal in the Diablo Range. Ringtails, they're in the raccoon family. They're extremely secretive and nocturnal. They're highly arboreal. They are fully protected by the state of California. You're not allowed to, they used to be trapped, but you can't do that anymore, and that's a good thing. Thing is, nobody knows exactly where they are, especially in the Diablo Range. There were sightings around Mount Diablo into the 1970s, but nothing that the authorities.
We had one in Pittsburgh 5 or 10 years ago.
That's cool.
It was injured, went to Lindsay Museum, and then was released back at the same location on the along the McKelvey Trail.
Yeah, I've been trying to track down all kinds of different information about where this species might be. Over the years, I've talked to about half a dozen people that I believe are legitimate. And the funny thing is, nobody's really seeing them. Like myself personally, I've never seen one.
Joseph, one was found in a restaurant in Oakland about 10 to 12 years ago, and it's thought it came in some sort of packaging. And Doug Bell from the East Bay Regional Park District went down and got it out of there.
Yeah, wow.
And where did it come from?
No, I've been looking for these things, looking for their tracks, and I've talked with other biologists at Pinnacles, and people always just assume that they're all over Pinnacles because the habitat looks so good, but they're not there. Between myself and a bunch of other biologists, they've had people out there doing all kinds of things, camera traps, what have you, looking for tracks, putting out bait, nothing. So I'm sure that they don't live in Pinnacles, but I do believe that they live in other places in the Diablo Range. In fact, I have a neighbor of mine got one on a camera trap, although I didn't verify that. But he's an honest man, and I believe him. And I want to believe him because he's my neighbor. They live on my place too. That's great. These are a couple of desert rarities that basically don't occur north of the Pinoche Valley. On the left is a giant kangaroo rat. The name rat is really a misnomer with this genus because they're more closely related to squirrels. They're not closely related to rats at all. They're not. On the right is a San Joaquin antelope squirrel. They're a California species of special concern. Both of these can be found in the Pinoche Valley. They disappeared mostly because they lost all their habitat on the valley floor, the Central Valley. It's, even though there's not a lot of people down there in the southwest Central Valley, there's a lot of agriculture, and that doesn't mix with these creatures. You can still see these in Pinoche. Well, you have really good chance of seeing the antelope squirrels. You'd have to be driving at night and get kind of lucky to see the giant kangaroo rats. Thule elk. So, if you go back around the gold rush, Thule elk were found throughout the Central Valley and the coastal plains. They disappeared largely because we kind of ate them to death. Back in the 19th century, even in restaurants, that was before the livestock industry and refrigeration really got going. So people ate wild game a lot, and this was a prime species. By 1900, they were down to several dozen, and they were rounded up and put on preserves. And then in the 1970s, they started bringing them back to several places in the Diablo Range. And by now, the herds have really increased. So you can find them anywhere from just out on Livermore all the way down to the southern tip of the Diablo Range. Maybe not contiguously, but their numbers are increasing. Here's another species that really benefits from corridors. I live along Pacheco Pass, and there's a vibrant population on the highway south of the road. And you've probably seen them if you've driven over Pacheco. You've probably seen them at the base of the dam. But you very rarely see them on the north side of the road. And highway crossings, which I believe the state is working on to get some highway crossings on Pacheco Pass, that would benefit this species immensely. I don't know how many of you have had the opportunity to go out and actually be hiking and see these animals, but it is an amazing experience. They are not like just large deer. They're very majestic animals that weigh a quarter ton. My hope is for everybody that wants to see a tule elk. I mean, this is one of the biggest success stories in California conservation history.
The easiest way to see them is Point Reyes National Seashore.
Yeah.
Particularly during mating season, it makes a loud noise.
Right, and this is the time of year when they start the rut, so they're starting to do that right now. They kind of early here. So anyway, I didn't know how many people were going to be here, and I don't know if this is going to work particularly well, but I kind of brought like a show and tell thing. So this is a plaster cast of a tule elk track, and I figured I would just pass it around the room. So if tule elk were a success story, pronghorn not so much. Pronghorn used to exist in many of the same areas that tule elk did, and they were doing fine until the gold rush. And a similar story, they kind of got eaten. Now they actually lasted a lot longer than elk did. In fact, there are records in the San Joaquin Valley near Coalinga as late as the 1950s, which is almost into my lifetime, I find that mind-boggling. The Department of Fish and Wildlife attempted some reintroductions in the Diablo Range in the 1990s, at least two that I know of, one in like South San Jose along Coyote Ridge, and the other near the community of Bitterwater, south of Pinnacles in San Benito County. That didn't go too well. Those animals were all gone before 2010. I don't know exactly why it failed. It may just be that the effort wasn't, you just don't let a few animals go and call it a day. Like as it is with condors, there is a lot of work and a lot of time and a lot of dedication, and I don't know that that's what happened with pronghorn. I just kind of have my doubts, but I don't know. At any rate, though, again, most of the Diablo Range is not good habitat for pronghorn because they like flat, open terrain. And they don't like fences at all. They have a hard time jumping over them. And they would prefer to go underneath barbed wire fences, but they've got to be about 18 inches clearance. And most barbed wire fences are more like this. So they get restricted like that, and they get vulnerable to coyotes and mountain lions. If there is some good news here, it's that they are still found on the southern edge of the Diablo Range around Parkfield and Showland. And my thinking is maybe these animals are coming up from the Carrizo Plain. And again, this is an example of a species that could benefit from having a connection in the corridor. I don't know if we can get them back in places like Pinoche Valley, but I sure would like to at least throw that out there and see if that's a possibility. Mountain lions. So they're at the top of the food chain. What a lot of people don't realize is that mountain lions, we kind of take them for granted these days that they're around, but between 1907 and 1963, the state of California issued a bounty on mountain lions. And in that 56-year time period, over 12,000 were killed in the state. Such that in the 1960s, when I was born, the thought was, they're probably not even existing in the Diablo Range at all, and very rare in the state. What's happened since then has been really encouraging because just 9 years after the bounty period ended, mountain lions have been fully protected ever since 1972. So California is the only state in the West that does not allow mountain lion hunting. And my personal take on that is that's a good thing. I don't believe in killing large predators. I've heard people argue that, I'm afraid that the population is going to get too big and we're going to get overrun with mountain lions. I don't worry about that because they're a self-regulating species. What I mean by that is they have these large territories, and the males will allow females into that territory, but they won't allow other males. So males end up killing each other. That's the main cause of death in California for male mountain lions is murder by other mountain lions. So again, I don't worry about them becoming too thick. What we're seeing happening in California, though, is habitat fragmentation. In the southern part, like in Southern California, they have lost their mountain lions in some of the smaller mountain ranges. Even in the Santa Cruz Mountains, where there's a study going on and a really great effort to try to figure out what's happening there, they're seeing signs of inbreeding. So it's pretty clear to me that the Santa Cruz Mountains in and of themselves are not large enough to sustain a mountain lion population. For that matter, I'm not even sure the Diablo Range is. I think it might be, but I think it's a really great idea to have corridors so that animals from these other mountain ranges can mix genes and keep the population healthy. Oh, before I forget, another show and tell item.
That's the front. That's the reader.
There's a pair of mountain lions.
Whoa.
So I'll pass those around. On to amphibians. California red-legged frog is the West's largest native frog. They're kind of like snowflakes to me because they have a variety of colors and a variety of patterns. They're not just red, although that red is pretty cool. They were the first frog to be listed under the Federal Endangered Species Act, and they were gone from over 70. By that time, they were gone for over 70% of their historic range. So yeah, they've lost a lot of habitat over time. They've also, like the two mammal species that I talked about earlier, they were a victim of eating. Back in the 19th century, frog legs were a delicacy, and they were found in many restaurants. And part of the reason that the California red-legged frog became so endangered is because people ate them. In fact, what happened later is when red-legged frogs got scarce, people brought in bullfrogs to California. And that was not a good thing for our ecosystem because bullfrogs will eat anything that's smaller than they are, including small red-legged frogs and tadpoles. The other thing that hits them really hard is in ponds, when you put fish in there, especially bass, but all kinds of panfish, they'll eat the tadpoles. So red-legged frogs don't mix at all with fish. The good news here is that the Diablo Range has become a stronghold for the red-legged frog because of an interesting habitat situation. All these stock ponds that were constructed over the last century or so have now provided, inadvertently, a whole bunch of extra habitat for red-legged frogs to the point where I'm confident in saying that there are more red-legged frogs here now in the Diablo Range than there were 50 or 100 years ago. So that's a good way where ranching can tie into conservation. Here's what some of the tadpoles look like. They get about 3 or 4 inches long. Another frog that our native frogs. This is the foothill yellow-legged frog. It is slated to be listed under the Endangered Species Act later this year. It's only found in streams, so it can't benefit from the pond building. They're affected by habitat loss, especially with dams. Downstream of dams, these things basically don't occur. They have some pretty strict habitat requirements, and it's almost impossible to maintain a dam flow regime and keep these frogs there. So on the bottom, these are some of the creeks around here that I know of that they're present in. I'm actually more worried about foothill yellow-legged frogs than I am about redlegs. Another animal you might be familiar with, California tiger salamander. They were listed as endangered in 2004. They're endemic to central California. They've lost a lot of habitat because they like the habitats that we like, both for agriculture and for living. originally, they have a very interesting life cycle. They need ponds to breed, they need ponds to breed in. They don't use streams. They're the opposite of yellow-legged frogs. So they breed in ponds, formerly vernal pools, but most of those are gone now. These days they use stock ponds, but they only spend the first part of their lives in stock ponds. Like tadpoles, they will get out of the water, and as adults, they will go and use upland habitats, which are not forests, which you might think for an amphibian, but actually more drier lands, grasslands, and they spend about 90% of the time underground in mammal burrows. They also live to be over 10 years old. And the young, here's a picture of some of the larvae. They go up to about 6 inches long. They're pretty hard to catch. They can move up to a mile from the pond that they came from. So I just found that fascinating that a tiny animal like that can move a mile from figure. Here's an interesting situation involving evolution. These animals are both found in the northern Diablo Range. On the left is a California newt. It's highly toxic. If you were to be so foolish as to eat one, you would die within hours. They've got enough poison in one to kill 4 or 5 people, I believe. On the right is a yellow-eyed salamander. They are not toxic at all, though I don't recommend eating them. They have evolved to look just like the poisonous newts. I just thought that was a pretty cool.
Yeah.
This is to see if people are still awake. You might have, some of you might have these in your backyards if you live near some natural areas. This is the arboreal salamander, and I think this is the only photo on here that I did not take. This really spoke to me because when I was 10 years old, I had this happen to me. I picked up an arboreal salamander and it just got onto my finger and just wouldn't let go. There's not, this isn't an endangered species in any way. It's just kind of a quirk that I kind of wanted to throw in here to the program. They're common in live oak woodlands. And just the idea of a salamander with teeth, I think, is the coolest. Because most lizards don't have teeth, and you think about it. And a lot of snakes don't either. Well, some snakes.
But they move fast like lizards.
They can bite quick.
I just want to know what you did to piss them off.
I just picked them up. Sometimes you just, you meet somebody and it just doesn't work out.
He was pretending to be an alligator.
Yeah. So, a few other amphibians, western toad, spadefoot toad. Toads are more adapted to dry land, actually. 4 types of slender salamanders, Pacific chorus frog. Western pond turtle. This is California's only native turtle. It's been split into 2 species, but I don't want to talk about that. It's a rabbit hole. These have been declining, and they are pending. They are pending to be listed on the Endangered Species Act sometime this year, which is a long time coming because they've lost a lot of habitat over the years. They too were eaten pretty heavily in the 19th and early 20th century. Hard for people to believe that, but it's true. They also suffer from non-natives, fish and bullfrogs. A young turtle like this is like an Oreo to them. So it's hard to maintain. I mean, older turtles can live 50 years and they can stay in the same pond with bullfrogs and fish. What they're seeing is that you don't get any reproduction, so that's a problem. They also have this kind of dual life between water and land. They need water, for safety reasons. They're much more safe from any kind of predator underwater. But they need to be submerged in order to feed. If you were to take a western pond turtle and put it in your backyard and put out food for it, it would eventually starve unless you had a pond. It needs to be underwater to eat. On the other hand, they need uplands for nesting habitat. And they also go upland in late summer when the streams start to draw back a little bit. The turtles leave before before it even gets dry. They go upland and they kind of bury themselves under leaf litter. So yeah, when you're talking about conserving this species, everybody, rightly thinks about watersheds, and that's great. But you also need to think about upland habitat too. And they are present in many Diablo Range watersheds, including on the east side. You might think that all that dry land there wouldn't be hospitable to turtles, but they do quite well. This is one of my favorites. Blainville's horned lizard. This is declining, and it's a species of special concern by the state of California. That designation doesn't really do much for them, but one thing it does do is it makes it illegal to keep them as pets. And I say that that's a great idea because these are very finicky eaters, and it's hard to keep them alive. They basically die of starvation in captivity. If you try to feed them a mealworm, that's not going to work. They pretty much need native ants, and most people aren't that good at identifying. Also, they're not at all compatible with any kind of development, whether it's agricultural or commercial or residential. You won't find these in your backyard like fence lizards or alligator lizards. So they're found throughout the Diablo Range, but they seem to be kind of spotty. It seems to me that they really need to have loose soils to bury themselves in, because that's their main line of defense. I mean, you won't see these guys ever climbing trees or posts or up on rocks. They are tied to the ground. Part of the reason for that is camouflage. Take a look at the picture on the right and see if you can see the horned lizard there. So I'm going to talk about several lizards that I've had the pleasure to work with over the last 10 years. The first, you're probably familiar with a little bit, and that's the blunt-nosed leopard lizard. They were listed as endangered in 1967, and they're endemic to the San Joaquin Desert pretty much, although there were records as far north as Corral Hollow into the 1960s. They've suffered a lot from habitat loss, because like horned lizards, they don't do well where we've altered the natural landscape. And that alteration includes, even in natural areas that we would consider open space, if you have high grasses, these lizards will disappear. They kind of like, their favorite habitats are almost bare earth like this. Some of the other things that they need are mammal burrows, where they take refuge in, scattered shrubs for shade. They like flat terrain. You're not going to find them if you go walking up hillsides. That's not the place to find this species. And like I said, open ground. There's a wonderful reintroduction project going on in the Pinoche Plateau, and Save Mount Diablo has been essential to helping that effort. Here's a species. Here's a picture on the left with an animal with a transmitter on it. So I was working. This was actually in the Carrizo Plain. I had a chance to help on a radio tracking project with this species, where we were out there at 9 in the morning, 12 in the afternoon, and 5 in the evening, trying to determine where these lizards were at different times of day. It was a really cool project. One of my favorite lizards is the yellowback spiny lizard. These are pretty much desert lizards. They're found all over the Mojave Desert, but if you come up north, their populations are disjunct. They're like giant fence lizards. They're close relatives of the fence lizard that you find in your backyard. So yeah, up here in the Diablo Range, they're known from a couple of areas. The Pinoche Hills, Griswold Canyon, around Coalinga. And there's been an ongoing genetic study going on to determine if these lizards, over time, because they've been separated from their relatives in the Mojave Desert for hundreds of thousands of years, if not millions of years. And what the geneticists want to know is, do we have a new subspecies or maybe even a new species here, as was determined with blunt-nosed leopard lizards. So my tiny role in this, is to catch spiny lizards. And I can tell, and take a little bit of the tail tip and send that off for a DNA sample. What I can say about this is, I don't think I've had any more enjoyment in the last 50 years than when I was catching spiny lizards. I don't know what that says about me. There you go. Another one, desert night lizards. A very similar story, a very different lizard, but a similar story. These lizards are all over the Mojave Desert. But north of the Mojave Desert, they're only found in a couple of places, both in the Diablo Range, one in the Pinoche Hills, one at Pinnacles. Now these two are maybe 30, 35 miles apart, these populations are. And even in the ones in Pinnacles, they're restricted to the volcanic area of the park. So basically the high peaks in North Chalone area, and that's about it. We suspect that they're very common in Pinnacles, but you never see them. I have hiked over 1,000 miles in Pinnacles over the years, several thousand miles, and I've seen exactly one on its own. The only time, they're almost like salamanders in that they hide underneath, they hide in rock crevices, and they're very secretive. The question here is, do we have subspecies and possibly even a separate species here? My belief is that we might have a Pinoche Hills night lizard and a Pinnacles night lizard. Now, I'm not a geneticist. I took a few classes in that, and I got a B+ because the teacher graded on a curve. But so take that for what it's worth. I'm not a geneticist, but I predict that we've got a different taxa here. Just a list of more Diablo Range lizards, and that's a young western skink with a beautiful blue tail there. Snakes, we've got 18 different types of snakes in the Diablo Range. On the left there is a common king snake. Everybody loves king snakes because they eat rattlesnakes. I don't know about you, but I like rattlesnakes. And so I put this slide up to show a lot of people end up confusing the two species. And actually, I should say the confusion's only one way. They mistake gopher snakes for rattlesnakes, and they end up killing gopher snakes. People shouldn't be killing gopher snakes, and people shouldn't be killing snakes. Yeah, I damn near left Facebook over stuff like this. I would see stuff like this, and I would just shoot out, and I have to tell myself, Joseph, there's a lot of morons out there. There's a couple of special status species here among our snakes. We probably are all aware of the Alameda striped racer. It's a subspecies. The main species, striped racers, are doing fine throughout chaparral and oak woodlands in California, but there is a subspecies found only in Alameda and Contra Costa counties that's got its habitat fragmented and a smaller population, and they are on the endangered species list. The species on the right is a San Joaquin coachwhip. It's actually a subspecies, and they're the fastest snake in North America. They can go up to 8 miles an hour, which is faster than the mouse. This is my favorite snake, the most beautiful, and you're more likely to see these in the Sierra Nevada and the Santa Cruz Mountains and the North Bay. In the Diablo Range, they're only spotty. They have a spotty distribution, and they're only found in the northern section. This is the only one I've ever seen, and I found it in Smith Creek Canyon, and that might have been the best day of my life. I don't know a great deal about fish. My major professor did, though, and all I know is there are steelhead and rainbow trout native still in Diablo Range in the northern section. I've listed several of the creeks there. It's not all encompassing. All I can basically say is that dams are bad for steelhead. And I think there's some really good work going on in Alameda Creek.
Yeah.
And when you talk about habitat connectivity, I think aquatic connectivity is something that we need to think about a lot too, because our aquatic habitats have been absolutely hammered in California over the last 175 years. I wanted to talk really briefly about the Sacramento pike minnow. I hope some of you have heard about it, but I'm figuring most of you don't. This is actually the largest fish in the Diablo Range. Don't let that minnow name fool you. These things routinely grow to be 2 feet long, and large individuals can get to be 3.5 feet long. I don't believe they're endangered or anything quite like that, but in the Diablo Range, they're only found in some of the more perennial streams. I don't have a picture though. And this picture, by the way, it took me 45 minutes. I was up on Smith Creek 2 weeks ago. It took me 45 minutes to get that shot. So I have a real good appreciation of what Scott Hine does. And how difficult it can be to get really good wildlife pictures, because this was the best of the lot. I talked briefly about the California condor. Where to begin? Okay. In the Central Coast, the story begins in 1997 when condors were released at Big Sur by the Ventana Wildlife Society. In 2003, Pinnacles was selected as a second site, and birds have been released there ever since. Currently, there are over 100 in Central California. And the good news is that the breeding is going very well. They're taking to the landscape quite well, and we're getting chicks every year. The bad news is we have more birds dying every year than are being hatched. So the population isn't self-sustaining where we need it to be. Their main problem is the mortality threat is lead poisoning, which they get from eating animals that have been shot with lead bullets. Now, lead bullets have been outlawed in California for, well, you can't hunt with lead bullets. That's been outlawed since 2019, but basically, people are shocked when they say, oh, is that still a problem? It's against the law. But I kind of tell them, it's like, well, there's laws and, people, it's against the law to drive over 65 miles an hour on Pacheco Pass, but I get people going 85. So that's a problem that we need to overcome. One of the other exciting things is, and I'm sure everybody here knows about this by now, but during the last 4 or 5 years during the summer, they're a frequent visitor to the northern part of the range, including Mount Diablo. I think we first noticed that in 2021.
4 years.
Yeah. So hopefully
this
that
is the
will be-
5th year we're waiting.
Yeah, yes, and they're starting to come up every night on Pacheco Pass. I'm getting readings. So basically, I've been as a little bit of a background. I've been working with the Condor on the Condor program as a volunteer since 2010 at Pinnacles National Park. So I've been coming in 2 days a week for 15 years. And again, Save Mount Diablo has come through big time here with their financial support. They're basically you've been paying for
20 GPS tags and some subscriptions.
Yeah, and so what the GPS tags tell us is they tell us where they're going. So they help us find nests. They tell us how far they go, and that's just what that's what's really inspiring about what Save Mount Diablo is doing for me, is because not only are you facilitating land protection, you're also directly helping species conservation and preservation. And there aren't many places that do that. Not many organizations do that. The cool thing about condors is they're highly photogenic, and unlike any other raptor that I can think of, they're unfazed by people. To the point where if they want to land somewhere and you're 10 feet away, they're going to land there. In fact, on the Condor crew, when we go up into the high peaks when there's a lot of people around, we're urged to tell people not to approach condors within 100 feet, to try to keep them as wild as possible. And that's great, but a lot of times the condors mess that up by flying in much closer to 100 feet than people. I guess what I'm trying to say in a roundabout way is that these birds are incredible birds, and to have the experience of having one fly over your head is something that I urge all of you to experience, and if you can, get out to Pinnacles. And the best time to do that, by the way, is January through April, although you can see them 12 months out of the year. I'm naturally kind of I tend to be kind of a negative person. Shock. But I like to look for points of light here. And with this slide here, what strikes me is that when I was a kid, mountain lions were gone. There were no condors. Nobody talking about bringing tule elk back. It seemed to be a one-way street in the habitat loss of diversity. But here I am 50 plus years later, and we have beavers on the peripheral of the Diablo Range, which I never heard of before. We have river otters not only on the periphery of the range, but actually in the Arroyo Hondo and Alameda Creek. There was a black bear on Pacheco Pass that got caught on a wildlife camera. And in 2021, a gray wolf came from the Sierra Nevada and spent about a week in San Benito County. If you would have told me that 10 years ago, I would have thought that you were crazy. I might have even said you were crazy. Who knows what the future holds? I'm trying to be as much of an optimist as I can, and maybe someday we'll have jaguars and grizzly bears too. That might make some people a little bit worried, but to me, that would be like heaven on earth. Lastly, my shameless self-promotion. I authored 2 books. They're in the back there. One is a condor book, and if you really like condors, you're going to love it. If you're not interested in condors, you won't get past the first chapter. The other one is the Diablo Diary. It's a collection of essays about many of the creatures that I've talked about tonight. And yeah.
Hey, Joseph, what did I ask you 2 days ago, and what was your answer? Condors, Adobe, etc.
Oh, yes. Okay, so we had a condor up at just a couple nights ago spend the night in Adobe Canyon, right?
Octo Puerto Canyon.
Yeah.
So we've started the watch on condors coming up because they've done August the last 4 years. So 2 days ago I asked him, because I know he'll be paying closer attention, have any condors come north? And that's as far north as they've come now. They've been just south of Livermore.
So yeah, I'll be selling these later on and signing them if you want. Price of product. The value will go down if they're signed. Anyway, thank you, Ted, for the invitation.
Again, let's take some questions. Joseph, you got a question right there.
I want to shout out to Joseph and thank him for his donation to Save Mount Diablo for Moonlight on the Mountain. At the last Moonlight, we bought his condor hike package at Pinnacles. So if you want to see condors with Joseph, I'm hoping he'll donate that again to this year's.
Yeah, it's happening. Yeah.
Awesome.
We did
it
also. It's fabulous. It's a great
Oh,
hike.
just asking if I'm going to be doing the leading a hike as part of the Moonlight on the Mountain auction. Yes. Thank you.
Also, I'm going to shout out the Diablo Diary, which I also read. It's a great book. It's really a chapter a night. It's perfect. And if you're into all of the animals and reptiles that you saw tonight, you'll love the Diablo Diary book.
Thank you, Joe.
Joseph, is the spiny lizard a Scoloporus?
Yes,
It is, okay.
it's like a bigger version of the fence lizard.
On steroids.
Yeah, exactly. And they're more ready. They're more likely to bite than the little guys.
The little guys which don't bite much, yeah.
Not much. I've only got bitten once by a little one, but
That would be its own book, how many different species have bitten you.
Or stung you, or.
Right?
Any
It's a good
updates
story.
on the lizard release? Like I seem to recall when we saw you in early June that there had been one that had been munched or something. Have you?
Oh, I asked Rory about that about 10 days after the first release, and I kind of was almost afraid to ask, and he told me they'd lost 4. But I asked, is that disappointing? And he said, no, he expects to lose a fair number. See, I'm kind of used to condors where every single bird is really important. But with something smaller like that, and an animal like that serves as prey for other animals, it's to be expected. So I guess it wasn't that bad of news.
Released 35, lost 4 in the next couple weeks.
Yeah, and I
And
guess
the big,
Rory's.
and the big predators up on the Pinoche Plateau are roadrunners and loggerhead shrikes.
Yeah.
I'm curious in that vein, how do biologists or whoever would make decisions about it decide which endangered species should be helped by being in a zoo and having a captive breeding program and then released? Like, how is that decision made?
I believe those decisions are made by the zoos themselves.
Oh, okay,
So
so
I
it's
don't
their
think-
initiative.
Yeah, I don't think as I understand it, and I've never worked for the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service, but I don't think that they actively recruit some of those things. I think that initiative has to come from people and organizations.
It's always an obsessive individual, and in that case,
Yeah.
it was the BLM biologist, Mike Westfall, working with the Fresno State professor, Rory Telemico. But it was the ecologist at BLM who closed off the area and then said, they're going extinct, we need to move now.
I just wanted to make one comment. I'm really glad Malcolm mentioned the ringtail cat in Oakland restaurant, because about 12 or 13 years ago, I saw a ringtail cat in Montclair in Shepherd Canyon. And Steve Bobzian that told me I was crazy. I didn't see that. It's like, I've seen them,
But you
Steve,
are.
I know what they are. I've seen them in Grand Canyon.
I was gonna say, I saw one in Arnold where I live,
Yeah, okay.
and it was, I was surprised because I'd never seen anything like it in 20 years living there. It's the only one I've ever seen. And my neighbor's dogs were going after it, so I obviously had to hop the fence and save it,
Good job.
which I did.
how
Get
cool.
the neighbor stuff, but I mean, only one in 20 years.
I've
So.
seen it in Point Reyes.
Yeah, no, I keep driving on Pacheco Pass and like slowing down for roadkill, which is like, that's one way for me to become roadkill in some ways. I keep looking for that and spotted skunks. That's another species that's on my list. Is like, you
You
should
see?
be here,
She thinks I'm crazy to pull over for roadkill.
You do that too?
Absolutely.
Yes.
Yes.
I had a question about wildlife, I think you briefly mentioned, like a wildlife overpass. And have there been places identified throughout the range where they would be particularly helpful? And is it just cost effectiveness and just, talking about connectivity?
Yes, that's a good question, and I know that there has been a lot of attention paid to that in the last 5 or 6 years, especially on Pacheco Pass, and I know some other areas too. They were soliciting information. In fact, about 3 or 4 years ago, the state of California emailed me and contacted me about, as a landowner along Pacheco Pass, they wanted to get onto my property to put radio collars on Tulio to assess their movements and to see where the best places would be for a wildlife overpass or underpass. And I gave them permission, but I never heard back from them. But that doesn't mean, I'm sure the project's going on.
Joseph, there's several actually being contemplated. One on Highway 101 south of Gilroy, and it was just a recent land, Rocks Ranch or something. No, that's on one, that's Pacheco Pass. But there's one that's actually in the drawing phase down there, and there's been a study on 580, 680 as to where the best places to be, or where is the best place to put one. And that's a study that's active and underway.
Yeah, I'm excited about some of those things happening.
I do these Facebook memory things, and so I know because of that yesterday, 4 years ago, was the first time I ever saw a San Joaquin kit fox when I was with Joseph down in Bakersfield, Carrizo, and also at the Bakersfield Zoo. And I've seen them every year since then. But that was about a year after you and I first met, Joseph. And what do you think about the progress on Diablo Range stuff in the last 5 years, and also about the conveying? Joseph did a speech, an introductory speech at the Diablo Range convening that we did on June 5th. And so, what's state of the Diablo Range? What do you think about it?
Well, I'm really optimistic despite my inherent pessimism.
Skeptical, not pessimistic.
Why?
Just seeing, well, basically it's something like Save Mount Diablo, the effort that they've taken to extend their range and their focus all the way south like that. Because to me, I've always thought in terms of saving populations and not just individual animal lives, which is great, but entire populations. And my thinking for so many years was, I was a big believer in the Mount Hamilton project by the Nature Conservancy. I thought that was a great idea when it first came out in like 1998 or 2000. And they accomplished some nice things, but I stopped hearing about that. And I was a little bit disappointed that there wasn't more going on. And that's the way it stood until I talked to you and I found out, I hadn't really heard about Save Mount Diablo prior to 2021. And, when we talked about that, you talked about the vision of expansion and protection, and also, like I talked about earlier, directly supporting species preservation, like the work with the condor and the blunt-nosed leopard lizard. It's like, that would be like, if you were to task me with, if you were to make me the king of the world, and you said, what do you want to happen to the Diablo Range? I'd have a hard time coming up with anything better or different than Seth's and now Save Mount Diablo's vision.
How long does it take for nature to understand that, how long does it take for them to use an overpass, nature overpass? How long does it take for them to realize it's even there?
That is a great question. It's because I've never really worked with overpass work, and I've always looked at that and I'm thinking to myself, well, that's great, that overpass right there, but what about a quarter mile down the road? You don't see,
Sean from our organization was telling me the other day that they actually, I did not know this, have like fencing that they put in that funnels.
Okay, yeah.
It's always about the
Or
fence.
so that their paths are over.
Yep.
It's like roads or
But the
traffic.
The overpass that was put in over Highway 17 at a spot where mountain lions were getting killed frequently, they had animals in it the first week. Not lions. It's taken a long time to get a lion to use it, which they now have. But they were getting deer and coyotes and things just right away.
But the funneling fences are a mile in each direction from that tunnel. We're just about to meet with Chris Wilmer, the guy who helped design and create that location for the Puma project, for one of our video projects, and he was describing that as their first big project, and a mile of fencing to funnel the animals toward the crossing.
But the great thing is it's been working.
Yeah.
That's what's really encouraging.
To thank Joseph, we have one of Stephen Joseph's books about the Mount Diablo area. And guys like you and I need to wear hats when we're in the mountains. Everyone, again, I hope that overview I gave at the start made you proud to be a Save Mount Diablo supporter and realize what you're helping us do. We're so grateful for you. Enjoy the rest of the evening. Thank you.